why is this 750? Whoa! Why did I give this fucking card away?
What, 750?
The Corey Steel Cutter, the +1/+1 trample and haste. Whenever you cast your second spell, you get a 1/1, you attach it to it naturally. And we opened a copy of it, and I was like, you can have it. I don't really need it. It's fine. And it would be pretty good in his Wyleth deck, right? But now I'm looking and I'm like, that's actually pretty good in. It's pretty good in Mabel.
I don't understand MTG finance anymore. I've decided.
But it's just 750 euros.
You know, like Dolam Gate is like a £20 card now. Or
Because
something.
it was only printed in Lorwyn originally.
I bought that for Grenzome.
Yeah, I had a foreign. This is one of the things that I bought when I was out in I was out in Mexico. I was like, a Japanese Dolmen Gate. I know exactly what it does, and I can tell everyone exactly what it does for like $3. Okay. That's when I was building Ish in 5 different ways.
Welcome to Magic the Flavouring, the Magic the Gathering podcast, where we talk about all things Magic flavour design and lore. I'm your host, Andy Mann.
Hello, this is Nathan Cancel.
And we also have a third co-host,
Yeah.
Muesli.
Muesli?
Who's here officially.
Yeah, he doesn't do it on cue. That's okay. We're gonna close this door over though, because traffic be trafficking.
There. So, you noticed something fairly interesting in
Well,
the new set.
let's be completely clear here. I am stealing this concept out of the annals of Reddit. I was not the first person to come up with this idea, but as soon as I saw it, I went, "That's really, really fucking cool." Absolutely didn't notice that. Let's talk about it because it opens. There will be occasionally a podcast of where we actually just start talking about something small and then we naturally progress into the other thing without then telegraphing it at the beginning of the episode. Because I was going to say, we didn't do a preamble for this too much, but I was going to say like, let's just talk about that and then see where the conversation goes. But we already did this. We already started the conversation and then it started to naturally progress into, there isn't necessarily a good or a bad side in Dragonstorm Tarkir or Tarkir Dragonstorm, the flappy flaps. So with 5 different clans all in balance, more harmoniously, there are elements of rivalry between them, and we'll get into that. But then maybe let's look at the last, say half dozen to a dozen and a half sets and see antagonist, protagonist. How's Magic been handling it recently? Obviously, there were big bads. We know that in being, Nicobolas, Phyrexia, and the Eldrazi. Within that, I think there's also a conversation to be had as to villainy within the aspects of all of those. But then just as a greater thing of like, as a Magic player, you are immersing yourself in that plane, in that set with these characters. And
Just our co-host Muesli giving their interjection.
Absolutely. With every set, you're immersing yourself in, right? And I guess there's a point where WotC doesn't want to have like all these really bad guys, because what if you want to immerse yourself in it? You're like, but I don't relate to bad people because I'm not a bad person.
Yeah.
So there is a degree of immersive quality that you have to kind of worry about, but in general, like fantasy stories typically usually have mustache twirling, big kind of bad guys, and then really super cookie cut, hero of the day Gideons. Yeah. And I guess it's funny that we haven't really had. I guess we'll get into it. Actually, we'll save that for later because we can get into that later. But villainy, pro, con, evil, good kind of thing. These are things that have been broken down over the course of Magic's history. And I think it's nice to look at that over the last few sets and then even maybe think about what the next few sets going forward are likely to have with that. There's obviously a big villain that's been reintroduced into the multiverse recently. So let's start small and then we can open it up a little bit larger.
So there's a factional element to Tarkir, and like Magic the Gathering, the designers of sets find it's quite an easy thing to do to build factions into the game because of the way that the colour cycle works and all that kind of thing. And I think coming back to a plane like Tarkir, which... 3 sets, but it was 1 block the first time around, and seeing the direct difference between how those factions were portrayed and what their dynamics were versus how they're portrayed now, especially in a set where dynamic and the changing of leadership and all that kind of thing is very much at the core of the story. But there's a specific cycle of cards which you've honed in on, which is like the encapsulation of this, and like maybe how Magic is starting to do away with good versus bad in factions. So what's the card cycle?
So the card cycle, the siege cycle, and this is specifically 5 enchantments that are dual colour, and they specifically show, say for example, Baron Step Siege, 2 white black. It's an enchantment. When this enchantment enters, choose Abzan or Mardu. obviously both clan colours that use the two shared
both have black and white in them.
precisely. And then, depending on which one you choose, you'll get a different effect. Abzan at the beginning of your end step, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Mardu at the beginning of your end step, if a creature died under your control this turn, each opponent sacrifices a creature of their choice. Now, this is very similar to the siege cycle from the original Tarkir block, where you had to choose between Khans and Dragons. And there, it was a little bit more clear-cut. As much as Sarkhan wants to believe that Dragons deserve, their place in the world, which I guess this set, very much like the latest set, Tarkir Dragonstorm kind of pushes that having harmony between the dragons and the humans is actually like the sweet spot, and it's the good thing, because neither the dying plane of all the clans succeeding at killing off all the dragons was a very good place to be, and then also it wasn't great to be in a place where all the dragons have all of the power, and obviously you're going to eat all of the humans. And prior to Dragonstorm Tarkir set, we had the Planeswalker guy that spoke about like the World Soul spell, or all the things that the clan leaders had to do to try and kind of create a greater equality, because they were under horrific oppression.
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting that we've kind of now come back to a point of where we are still having difficulties and rivalries within the clans, but it's on a much more realistic scale of, there's always going to be border disputes, there's always going to be trade disputes, there's always going to be even things like cultural disputes between different aspects of society and what they believe to be true, whether or not... I mean, none of the conflicts are actually stated within the cards at all. It just shows that there are still points of contention across Tarkir, where the clans, as much as they are working individually amongst themselves with the dragons to have this element of harmony, they are still at odds with one another somewhat, but maybe not to the degree of any individual clan trying to take over and beat the rest of them out.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing that gets... is that interesting word again? And the thing that makes it the most eloquent, I think, from a gameplay to flavor kind of translation, is that the regular printings all have that the first clan listed, so as this Uncharmed enters, choose Abzan or Mardu. The Abzan are the ones defending, and the Mardu are the ones attacking. And this is true across all of them. So Baron Steppe shows a bunch of an Abzan outcrop that's being attacked by a bunch of the Mardu. The Frostcliff Siege shows the Temur, this is the blue-red one, attacking a Jeskai settlement. Glacier Wood Siege, the green-blue one, shows the Sultai attacking a Temur settlement. Hollow Musk Siege, the green-black one, is showing the Sultai defending against the Abzan. And then finally, Windcrag Siege shows the Jeskai attacking a Mardu encampment. And that kind of uniformity across all of them is, in of itself, something that's quite cute, and it's something that you wouldn't necessarily notice. And when you do notice, it's very prevalent and obvious that this was meant to be. And it's kind of something to also consider that the abilities then also have a attacking and defending nature. The Abzan being the ones that are defending from Baron Steppe Siege. At the beginning of your end step, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Okay, all of the creatures that survived that turn, that are able to, not die on the battlefield, are stronger because of what they've learned from that day. Whereas if the Mardu are successful, and from Mardu point of view, for every soldier that they lose, having your opponent, sacrifice a creature of their own, it shows that the losses of so the attacking force has a homeland, right? Yeah. It has its own settlement base, it has all of its own things. This is just a small contingent going out, and as long as for every life that you lose, your opponent loses a life, they are at a lesser point, and you've attacked their homestead. So it kind of almost tries to translate that as well. With some of them aren't quite so clear cut. Like the Frostcliff Siege, I think works fine with the Jeskai being the defenders. Whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, draw a card. Is that a defensive? That seems more aggressive. Whereas the Temur one, creatures you control getting +1/+0 and have trample and haste, feels very much like the attacking force coming and getting you. I guess the idea being that for every attack that the Jeskai get back, they gain information, which is where drawing a card normally comes in. And you could probably finagle and argue this all you like, but it kind of shows that there is a conflict between each of them that might be fair, also considering that every single defending clan has a different siege that they are the oppressors in as well.
Yeah.
So no clan is free of blame for being antagonistic to the others, and no clan is free from defending from other clans' attacks.
Yeah, I think it's a really good way of showing that all of the sort of, motivations of all different factions, all this kind of thing, in a game that is fundamentally about battling and about like combat, which, you can't get away from it. You have life totals, you have creatures on the battlefield, all your spells are combat tricks and all that kind of thing. It's very difficult to have a faction in a game like this which is like a total pacifist or whatever else. And especially, like, I think if you look at older Tarkir and how it was like originally presented, you have clans like the Abzan and the Jeskai that maybe have a more sort of like, defensive or pacifist sort of bent to them, where yes, they've got combat and like, martial arts, but their motivations seem a lot more sort of like
noble,
almost, right?
Yeah.
Versus say like the Mardu or the Sultai, which they're sort of living for combat and a kind of grab for power, sort of more wanton destruction way. And it's a much more nuanced approach in New Tarkir, where you have these different sieges that are showing like, no, the Jeskai are fully capable of being like, we're going to go and attack this thing like, aggressively, and we're going to, use our skills and our culture to try and, gain territory or gain power or whatever else. So yeah, I think it's a really cool cycle. I mean, sometimes the cycles, we've called it out when we used to do Flavor Picks episodes, especially in things like core sets, where you have a cycle of cards where just one of them just doesn't quite fit, or you wonder like, oh, okay, they had to just cram a 5-color cycle into this, or blah, 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 blah. And I think having this 3-color basis for Tarkir really frees them up to do something interesting. I was looking at the color combinations, the color pairs, right, which is your Orzhov, your Simic, your Golgari, and your Boros, to use fucking Ravnican terms for the color pairs, right? I was trying to think, is there like a way that the color that they've missed out is significant? I can't quite get there. I think it was just convenient, right?
Yeah.
That'd be a step too far.
I think there are enough mechanics that overlap when you've got a black-white cards that you can make one that feels more black and you can make one that feels more white. Like the Abzan ability feels way more white. The add encounters to all of your creatures. I think the Outpost Siege, the white one from the original Target block, did something similar. Where at the beginning of your upkeep you put +1/+1 counters on something. And then the Mardu one being the black effect of being at the beginning of your end step, if a creature died on your control, each opponent sacrifice a creature. That's just Grave Pact. So it's kind of interesting that even though the two colours bridge the two clans, that it seems that one side is leaning on one of the colours that bridges the two of them, and the other one is leaning on the other colour that's bridging the two of them. Similar thing with Frostcliff Siege. The Jeskai are definitely leaning on the blue side, the coastal piracy effect of when your creature deals combat damage, you draw a card, whereas Team are definitely going into that kind of battle cry effect of creatures you control get +1/+0, have trample and haste. Yeah. That's definitely on the red side. And that's something I hadn't really considered, but even though it's trying to show the bridge between the two, if they both share this colour combination, these cards individually aren't actually giving you two different Orzhov abilities, showing how the Abzan uses Orzhov and the Mardu uses Orzhov. Is actually showing that even though both of these clans are Orzhov, one of them is much more leaning into the white side of things, whereas one is much more leaning into the black side of things.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably true across all of them. I think if we were to say, let's think about it for a second. Okay, if we were thinking if all of the clans were monocolour, Abzan would be white, Jeskai would be blue, Temur would be green, Sultai would be black, and the Mardu would be red.
I think I remember I was reading an article somewhere. It might have been a bit about Dragonstorm, but they were referring back to the original design of the clans. And they did design them by having
the primary
colour in mind. And then the tertiary ones, like,
which I'm pretty sure they also did with Lara when it was the shards, not the wedges.
I think I was reading it in terms of like how they ordered the pips on the cards.
Yeah,
they tried to have
because even here, funnily enough, Mardu Siegebreaker is on the page.
Yeah, that's on my Scryfall too.
Because obviously it has siege in the title, and it does go. It's the red faction.
Yeah.
With white affiliation and then black affiliation. It almost shows that this is the primary, the secondary, and then the tertiary.
Yeah.
And it'd be maybe cool to look at that in the future. If we ever go back to Alara, I'd be interested to see us do a comparison of the 2-3 colour sets of how they've treated colour identity on cards.
Or indeed New Capenna.
Also, exactly, yeah. And again, that's something maybe we didn't consider, is what is the primary colour of each of the different families.
Ooh.
And then how do they actually use the other two colours. I think it's probably less prevalent, maybe because one, it's so far ago that our minds aren't on it as much.
Yeah.
But it also felt like the colour identity for these clans was really focused on to try and give them this the good side and the bad. It's not even a good side and a bad side, but to set an actual legitimate neutrality on them.
We also, just for posterity, can't forget Ikoria also was a 3-colour set.
I mean, yes, but it wasn't 5 clans, really, was it?
It was 5 biomes,
triomes? So it had 5 triomes, but then the humans had to fit within 3 different factions within that. So it was a little bit... We did a monsters versus humans thing, right? So
we're not talking about...
Yeah, we already did that. So the last thing I'll say about the siege cycle, to kind of wrap it up a little bit, was that the regular artworks show the defensive. They show the place of where is what is being defended, you know, and whereas the alternate artworks, the full artworks,
these are really cool,
shows the battle plan of the aggressor.
Yeah.
So the Barren Steppe siege shows the Mardu planning the attack of the Abzan settlement.
Yeah.
And this works for all of them, and it's all top-down dioramas with their little fucking figures and a map doing that. And that's one of my favourite things in war. And it was like there was a TV show about this years ago where they'd look at a random battle from history, a Roman or a Greek battle. You get all of your contingent.
Are you talking about the game show?
It was kind of like a game show.
It was like a video. It was like they were playing a video game of a battle.
Yeah,
and they had their blocks.
And obviously, it was because it was also historically relevant.
What is this fucking game show?
Every time they used to talk, every time they go into like, oh, well, these specific troops, they'd go, so if you went back in time and looked at these troops, they did this, this, and this. They were good in these formations. They had these weaknesses, and then they showed the people trying to use those troops to win the battle as if they were the general having that war happen, which was, for my young mind, amazing. It was like D&D meets Call of Duty for me, which was this weird fusion that I didn't think that I would have any affinity to, but my god, did I have affinity to it. And the artwork in each of these sieges where it shows the map, and it's literally got people with their hands, like, of the different clans, putting it down, moving the different pieces into place. And it's great because you see that on the alternate artwork, and then you see the plan in action on the regular artwork actually happening. Like there's a skyship in Windcrag Siege.
Time Commanders.
Time Commanders.
Look up Time Commanders.
Oh my god! If anyone knows, it's such a good show.
I can't believe that when you started describing that, I was like, oh, there's definitely a
TV
show.
And I bet you can remember exactly what the studio looked like as well. Yeah.
It looked like a bad escape room.
Yeah. Exactly that. Yeah, Crystal May's gone wrong.
Yeah.
And it shows on Windcrag Siege, it shows the battleship coming from behind the Mardu settlement, and then in the artwork, you've got the battleship in the back of the artwork coming up. So it's actually it's artistically accurate between the two artworks as well. So the point of where I'm pretty sure they've gone, and it's all different artists, by the way. Every one of the different sieges is a different artist, as in that it's not even like one person did the cycle of the regular artwork, one person did the cycle of the others. Every individual one is from someone different. So there must have been explicit communication to carry this story point and this flavor point across effectively. And I'm kind of surprised that it hasn't been highlighted like greater. Like,
I mean, there's another whole episode to be had where we can talk about how like primary art and alternate art cards relate to each other directly, because they don't do it as much as you would like them to.
This feels way more coherent. Even the fact that the full art versions of things like Mardu Siegebreaker have all of the color out of it. There's almost no background because the symbol, the icon, the watermark that we have of that particular clan dominates the back.
Well, do you know what that alternate art style reminds me of? It reminds me of the OG key art for the original Tarkir block, because that was very much the style. Do you remember like the bundle boxes?
For me, it reminds me of like Capcom versus Marvel, where it
does
when you have like the battle screen, it goes, "This is your player."
I bought 2 booster packs when I was playing Magic the other day at Badger in Deptford. Shout out to Badger in Deptford. And I pulled Smiles at Death in this art style.
Oh wow!
That's
nice.
going straight into my Archangel Everson deck.
So it's those cards where you're like, this is perfect for this specific deck, but because I chose a companion, I can't put it in, and it makes you go, just take the companion away.
No one likes companions.
Just take the companion away. I'm like, but the point is, that's the whole point, is I've managed to make it work without putting anything. Anyway, that's not the point. But so the idea for this was, it kind of led me into thinking they've put a lot of effort into making sure that every clan feels somewhat antagonistic and yet somewhat protagonistic.
Yeah.
And even within, so if we look at now, we're moving away from that because that was the platform I went from. And also, just as a cycle, this is probably one of the best flavour cycles that I've seen in recent
100%
recent
agree.
sets.
Yeah, big time.
And the more I looked into it, the deeper the lore got. And it's almost like I feel like it's an injustice not to try and speak about it.
I really think just overall, Dragonstorm has been an absolute mind-blowing set for like followers. It's an absolute triumph.
Do you know what people are saying? He shouts from across the room.
Yeah, what are people saying?
People are saying Magic's back. I was like, where did it fucking go?
Well, no, I think in an era where half of our release schedule is going to be Universes Beyond,
especially for this
all
year,
of the Magic sets need to fucking smash it out of the park.
it was really important. And you can go back a couple of episodes ago, and there's me saying, don't really care about dragons.
Mm-hmm.
Turns out this set, the most interesting things is the not the dragons bit.
Yeah.
And I didn't really like the clan idea initially. I was like, oh, okay, it's a bunch of individual
Tarkir
rivalries.
just wasn't your jam.
No, but this has... And I don't like the whole happy-clappy, everybody's getting along kind of aspect of it. Also,
but this shows that that's not the case.
but it also shows that it works to say, hey, everyone can be a bad guy and everyone can be a good guy.
Well, see, now this is the natural conversation. So when you pitched this episode to me the other day, my immediate thought was, okay, we can talk about those 5 cards, but I'm not sure we can fit that into an episode, if I'm honest. But it is a really interesting idea. And then I was thinking, when was the last time that we had, like, a faction...
Yeah.
that was the bad guys.
Yeah.
And I was trying to, like, key back into, like, recent Magic sets, and I was like, okay, there's this, just from my memory, there just seems to be this kind of prevailing idea that they're moving away from having bad guys versus good guys.
Mm-hmm.
I use the term guys, obviously, in a pejorative. And instead it's more like abstract, overarching threats, or big bads that are maybe part of a faction, but they're not the faction.
Yeah.
And, like, do you know what I mean? And I know it seems like I'm splitting hairs here, but...
No, I think that's the idea.
I remember, I wasn't playing Magic at the time, but when you cast your mind back to Invasion Block or Dominaria, they would have the Cabal versus the Weatherlight. The Phyrexians versus the Weatherlight. Do you know what I mean?
It was heroes versus villains.
Yeah.
And it's kind of ironic, because the rest of the year is going to be things like Final Fantasy and Marvel, which are very much... bad guys and good guys.
Yeah.
But Magic has actually done a pretty good job of dancing around that recently.
And so I think what we're going to do is I've looked at the past 16 sets, right? Which, when we read them out, you're going to think there's no way that's 16 sets and we've only gotten to that one.
I know.
Because there's a fucking lot of Magic that's happened in the past 2 years.
Just for reference, I've done about 4 to 5 points on each one, and I got through 2.
Right, exactly. So we're going to go back in reverse order for the past 16 sets. We're going to look at the factions that we think, or at least just from memory, because I didn't go too deep back into the story. I just went, in my mind, these were the bad guys. Yep. And we're going to assess very quickly, rapid fire, whether A, they are actually the bad guys, and B, whether they fall into one of 3 categories, right? And the categories aren't important, but this is the kind of thought process I had. Is it a faction that on the whole is... these are bad guys, and they are the antagonists.
And people within that environment agree.
No, and they all know.
Yeah,
and they're all like, yeah, we are the bad guys.
So they're aware, everyone else is aware. It's almost like the Sith.
Everyone
knows the Sith are bad.
The evil guys.
The Empire's bad, but they're like, yeah, but we're the Empire. We're going to keep doing it. We're going to, let's not
objectively, they're evil, right?
Objectively, they're evil, yes.
Is it that it's a big bad that might have some goons, some mobs, as they get called in video games? Right? Minions. But really, it is the big bad, which is very easy to pin, like, this is the antagonist of the set. But when you're playing the game out, my point is, when you're playing the game of Magic, and you maybe build a deck that functionally would revolve around one of 2 factions, because of the way the colour pie works, the way the mechanics work, they're designed to be played factionally. You're not grabbing your Valgavoth card and being like, yeah, my whole deck is Valgavoth cards, right? You are literally being attacked by Muesli. It's so funny. Or is it version 3, which are... they've really done away with the concept of good and bad factions, and it's this existential
There's a hint
idea
of it all. Yeah.
That is the threat. And the only one that I'm going to accept as, this is against my point, which is, there are now no longer good or bad guys in Magic, is if we find a set that has an objective faction that is objectively the bad guy.
Yeah, sure. Because I guess on an individual basis, everyone is capable of good and capable of evil, and we just... that's the other thing you have to consider, is sometimes in these stories, we catch people at their worst. Sarkhan, for the most part, is a hero. In this particular story, horizon-spanning monster charcoal dragon, which we never get to see in the fucking set, by the way. Why would you put a 2-mana human version of him when you know he's going to turn into a Draco god?
Yeah.
What the fuck?
Do you know, in my mind's eye, do you know what he looked like in his dragon form with the description we got? So it was on a magic card. Have you seen the Dungeons and Dragons film?
Thunderchild. Yeah.
Thunderchild.
That's exactly it for me. That mixed with Hellkite Overlord, which was the first time you ever really get to know about Sarkhan back on Alara. Yeah, it's a massive shame we didn't get his giant Draco form. I'm very disappointed. Anyway. We're so in sync.
This episode, I was thinking in my mind, I was going, okay, this is a cerebral thinky episode for us. And then it's like, no, it just takes us 20 minutes to kick into gear and just be like,
I blame the Smirnoff Ice.
Yeah, you're Smirnoff icing it.
Spiked with rum.
Spiked. Is it spiking when you're doing it to yourself?
Yeah, 100%. I will regret this later. Okay.
All right, past 16 sets. Let's start with Dragonstorm Tarkir. Tarkir Dragonstorm.
Yes.
So, very quickly, who's the bad guy?
Tigam? Question mark?
No, the latest Dragonstorm. Dragonstorm Tarkir.
Yeah. Tigam? Question mark?
No.
Because we never got... Yeah, this is why I said question mark. Sarkhan? Question mark?
No, he's not a faction. He's not a big bad.
Is it Jace? Question mark?
Is he in the set?
Kind of, but only in the story.
So I kind of feel like they have to at least be in the set. So my argument is, this is the quintessential, there are no good guys.
There are no good guys.
There are no bad guys.
There are no bad guys, yeah.
There are no good guys, there are no bad guys.
Everyone's neutral.
The only, and if you compare this to old Tarkir, you could have said the Sultai were the archetypal sneaky.
Whereas now Sultai just like farmer guys.
The Sultai
with heritage
we've
and
done
stuff.
away with government because we didn't trust it.
They are essentially the new Amonkhet, right? That's like kind of that Amonkhet-y idea.
I did think that.
Yeah. It's got a lot of parallels.
Absolutely not.
Yeah, and I'd say the thing about Tarkir you have to think of, and this will probably be a simple thing for factions in general, is a faction isn't bad from its point of view, and it's hard for us as objectively to go, these people are bad for defending their country. Because they might defend it in a bad way. We might get to the story where they're like, oh, Abzan are taking a really long time to decide on this thing and it's really important. I'm like, yeah, but that's their process of politics.
I suppose that narratively what you'd have to say, and this is maybe we'll use, the reason we're talking about Tarkir a little bit longer is because we'll use this as the basis for what we jump onto other things.
Yes.
If you look at the Sultai society, to use very broad terms, their society reveres and is based on, in the old school, before they got all lovey-dovey, making deals with demons, being surreptitious, being sneaky, usurping each other.
Black qualities. The idea of ambition and not selfishness, but self-preservation and that kind of thing. All of the things that make you a black mage, the Sultai used to, be very, very overtly part of.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas now it feels like they're more into their green roots.
Right. Whereas you say you put that against, I don't know, the Abzan, which again are another black faction, but they also have the white of like society and kinship and defense and all that kind of thing. So that's why I say like the narrative was treating them as if they were the sneaky bad ones, right? But now that's not the case. No. So Tarkir, we can say no bad guys, no good guys.
Actions of a bunch of people that were misguided that led to some bad things happening.
Yeah. Ether Drift.
Oh, this is a funny one because none of the 10 race teams are bad.
The speed demons?
Even then, Winter was probably one of the most sympathetically, that's the card where he's on his knees, and even in the story, everyone's like, "Oh, but poor Winter."
Yeah.
And we'll get to that when we get to Duskmourn.
Even like the End-Raisers, the Kill Haulers, all of these like aggressive factions.
They're fine.
They're not bad.
No, none of them are doing
guys,
anything overtly evil. The most evil thing we get to. Within the race, we'll talk about the bit outside the race in a second, but the most evil thing that happened within the race is the fact that Winter put loot in a cage that was too small.
Right. But again, I sort of feel like the narrative was treating them as if they were sort of beholden to a power outside of themselves, and they weren't themselves being like, look how spooky we are.
And it wasn't evil, oh my god, we need to stop them. It was like, oh, I guess they're probably doing some underhanded stuff.
Oh, they're cheating.
Oh yeah, oh no.
Yeah.
Oh, they're using technology.
Again, it's a light-hearted set, right? The other one you could maybe argue is the Consulate.
So the new Consulate, which is most overtly wrong, but I think they were almost played specifically to allow Jace to have his position.
But again, in the narrative, we even said that the dad was kind of sympathetic.
Yeah, and again, he's just like, oh, I'm getting left, like, my way of doing things might be wrong, but I'm being left behind. And that generational shift is a difficult thing to accept sometimes. Yeah. And I think at the end of the day, you're supposed to think that moment when Jace literally mind fucks Chandra to the point of having like an aneurysm or something, that's the point of where we're supposed to consider Jace is a bad guy. Because by the time we get to Tarkir and we see him, we don't go, oh, Jace is here, that's good. We go, oh, fuck, Jace is here. What's he done now?
Exactly. So there we go. So Ether Drift doesn't count as having a factional antagonist. Duskmourn. Now, I had two candidates for Duskmourn. One of them was softer than the other. My initial thought was things like the Wicker Folk or the Razorkin.
I thought this as well, yeah.
However, what do you have? However, for them?
Yeah, it's just a translation of the house around them, right?
Also, they're very sympathetic because they are survivors that get turned into that shit.
Of course, you're going to lose your mind and start to go a little bit off kilter. Yeah, completely understandable.
And I suppose it functions.
You don't consider mentally disturbed people to be evil;
No.
they're just dangerous.
And I suppose in the game, as a function, if you were to like sit down with the cards and play out, say like, oh, okay, the red faction, they kind of get spread out a little bit more.
Yeah.
Now the other one, which I think actually it's maybe too soon in Magic's history for my point at all to really stand of this whole premise. However, I think these are the exception that prove the rule. The Cult of Valgavoth.
Yeah. Though, if we're willing to forgive the Razorkin, then I don't understand why we wouldn't be willing to forgive the cultists just because they've been less transformed, quote unquote.
I would say. So my argument for that is, whilst the Razorkin, the Wicker Folk, the what were the stupid geists called? Scramble geists.
Yeah, sure. That's a whole other Echo ghosts.
Glitch
ghosts.
Oh fucking hell!
No, it's all
I've reminded myself
of how bad it was.
So the reason I think the Cult of Valgavoth are different is because they are human beings with of sound body and mind as much as you can on that plane. Have decided to save themselves by pledging their allegiance to a demon.
But do we know how much that pledging wipes them of their humanity? Similar to kind of Arcane when Victor's like, I'm going to cure them, but it ends up removing their humanity. I think it's almost like a brainwashing aspect of, because in his alternate artwork, the dad has like these big
Victor.
glowy eyes, and obviously they've been alive. We presume
He's
for a
wearing
fair.
glasses.
Oh, is it glasses?
wearing
That
glasses.
makes way more sense.
In
my mind, I was like, oh, he's got these big shiny eyes.
He's depicted. I mean, this is my read of it. He's depicted as being a 1970s MK Ultra like conspiracy dad.
But how long have they been alive for? Like, how long do we think that this has been going on for? Because it must have taken a fair amount of time for the entire...
I'm not saying that they're
And I'm not trying to defend it. I'm just offering a devil's advocate aspect to it because I agree with you. I think the big thing we have to consider about Valgavoth is that he's almost beyond characteristic comprehension. You know, like his current form, you know, like the walls around you are alive and evil. It feels more like a psychological threat than a specific, you know, like there's this guy that we can go and put in jail and then everything will be okay. It's almost like the world around you is influenced.
And I will say, as big bads go, Valgavoth's specific deal does make it seem like it could be more of a brainwashy type thing.
Yeah.
All right.
He is specifically evil, and then also you have to realize that because if we're going to talk bad guys, the good guys in the set are such a deliberately cookie cut murder mystery team.
But that's why I think they're definitely playing off of that. These the survivors, these the hunters, right?
Yeah.
All right, maybe we'll put a pin in Dustmore and move on, and maybe we'll swing back around to it once we come to some other ideas.
It also might be one of those things that years down the line when we see what Valgavoth's, eventual track, there might be more information coming when it comes to Duskmore.
Bloomburrow, I think deliberately didn't have good or bad factions.
Calamity Beasts
but they're
shows
part of nature. Yeah,
that's exactly it. It's almost an Eldrazification of the big bad, of where they're just forces of nature acting, and it just happens to be that as a human, I go and walk on some grass, I actually accidentally crush 3 different bugs. Am I evil?
You also couldn't build a Calamity Beast limited deck, right?
5-color nonsense, every different kind of ability kind of thing. Yeah, they're not factioned together. They are just aspects of things. Yeah. It's like you can't say that a tornado is evil.
Yeah.
But it will fucking kill me.
I also think they did a really good job in the world building texts of going like the rabbit folk are very good at this, they do that. They don't get on with this other folk. Like they really specifically tried to make the world like a little bit hustle bustle. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay, so I've got 2 questions. Glab, your typical almost pantomime fool of a bad guy.
Yes.
I just did a thing that I thought would help, and it made everything worse because I'm an idiot.
Mustache twirler.
Yeah, and then I also just decided because I had to cover up my mistake I had to cover up my mistake, which makes me even more evil. Cruel Claw?
Yeah, but again, they're lone actors, and also the stakes in Bloomburrow were so low.
Yes. That even a mercenary is only going to do so bad, He didn't kill it. Did anyone die?
So I was... No.
Was anyone at any real threat of dying? Did we ever feel at any point that anyone was actually going to die?
I think Glab was almost had Mabel. I think he was like...
Yeah, but I don't think at any point I was ever like, oh no. It was always like, this is always going to go in a positive direction. I mean, Bloomburrow was very much a palate cleanser, right? Of where you can't have your fluffy... Red Wall set have this big bad ending. Imagine Shouldered showing up in Blu-ray. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
It's anachronistic to the quality of the story they were telling for that one. And I think it worked enough to have the existential threat of nature, and then a couple of fools, than having an actual antagonistic, the government was bad and all the soldiers were against them. You know, it's not like Queen of Hearts, who is an actively terrible person through and through. It's that Glab was just a little bit fucking stupid because he happened to get a little bit of knowledge of something and then misinterpreted it.
I agree. So, Bloomburrow, no bad guys, no good
guys. No bad guys, no good guys. Well, that's the thing. The no good guys, I think we have to put to a side because I think they always try and push that there are protagonists.
Yeah.
And they are always just because they are our lens at looking through the world. And I think each time you go, the Scooby-Doo gang from Dustmore, obviously good guys. The ragtag Lord of the Rings group of different races in Bloomburrow, obviously the good guys.
Sure.
I guess the obviously good guys is much more easy, and maybe there's going to be a few sets we get to where I'm like, okay, there isn't even a good guy. I think in both of those sets, it's pretty obvious who you're supposed to be rooting for. It's just that the evil is a little bit more nebulous.
Yeah, there's no bad guys. Outlaws of Thunder Junction, again... I mean, it's a set of villains.
So that's a little bit more easy, right? Because that's the funny thing is, it's a set of villains, and yet the government, because it's outlaws, right? Any cowboy thing is that you are backing someone who is actively it's like coming back around to superheroes, vigilantes, the Sokovia Accords. These people cause damage and actually cost people lives, but they're trying to save the world. This is the flip of that because cowboys aren't trying to save the world; they're quite selfish. All of the gang are literally a gang of illegal mercenaries all trying to help each other and actively bad people. You've got Gisa, you've got Vraska, you've got people that have had, quote-unquote, bad backgrounds and are bad people. Even Oko was the villain of the set of Eldraine, which I'm sure we'll get to.
Arguably the villain of the set of
But you add all of these villains together and you put it from their point of view and suddenly they're the protagonists. But that doesn't make them good guys.
No.
But it also, I don't think it means that the other guys are the bad guys.
Well... So there are two factions that I had in mind.
Sure.
Because they did, believe it or not, in Outlaws of Thunder Junction, they did make factions. Even though it was fucking poorly represented.
There's 67 legendaries that all have no affiliation with each other, but let's try and put them together.
One was the Sterling Company, which was the sort of pseudo-law.
Yeah, and you're not supposed to like them, right?
No.
It's funny how I've never been a law mage, per se. I've always I'm one of those kind of contrarians. I'm like, I like chaos and stuff. And I'm sure there are people out there that really enjoy being a paladin, for example, in their D&D campaign. But I wonder if those people look at that set and go, oh yeah, fuck the people that we're following. Yeah. I'm here for row.
The kind of white law faction is fucking Sterling Company.
You know what I mean?
And the other one is the Hellspurs.
Now that's much more obvious, but again, I don't think it's very difficult to tell. You can't tell me that a demon isn't a bad guy.
Yeah.
And that's a very hard thing to argue. And I think it's pretty obvious when the bad guys have people that are worse than them, and you're following the bad guys as protagonists. The other guys are clearly bad guys.
It was definitely Outlaws of Thunder Junction. If they were trying to get away from the Avengers of the Guild, not the Guild, Gatewatch, it was definitely them trying to do Guardians of the Galaxy / Suicide Squad.
Oh, true, yeah. Of where it's like, hey, these people are just more evil than we are.
They're evil, but they're charming.
Yeah, whereas, you're not even evil. It's like that they do bad things, but they do it in a way that I can kind of be like, hey, that's kind of cute and sexy.
Whereas the Hellspurs were just like, I'm going to shoot you in the face.
Yeah, they're maniacally always in red and black. Do I see this faction as deliberately Rakdos just because red and black are the bad colours?
Yeah.
And that's exactly what they were. You know, as soon as you put red, black on a demon, I'm like, oh, he's evil and bad, isn't he?
I suppose my initial... So I did colour code my notes, and I suppose I put these guys in the kind of mid-orange. If red is like my, no, this is definitely a thing.
Yeah.
I did put both of those in my kind of orange category of like, they're definitely factions which you could point to be like, they are the antagonists. Yeah. But is it still a narrative choice by Wizards to be like, there are bad guys, but they're all bad guys?
Because I guess we also don't know the Hellspur motivations so much. You know, there isn't like there isn't a sympathetic aspect to them. Whereas there's a sympathetic aspect to our gang, even though we know most of them are doing it for self. In fact, Kellen is our main point of view, right? And he's surrounded by all of these ne'er-do-wells. So he's actually the good guy, surrounded by slightly worse guys, surrounded by even worse guys.
This is a reverse of then. Instead of having a individual big badder who's like, they can pin all of their, like, oh, they're driving the antagonist story and it's not a faction. Instead, we have, this is the outlying protagonist that has to deal with all the rest of the villains.
Yeah.
So in that
the entire plane is bad guys.
So in that case, then, it doesn't count. It doesn't meet our metric of, this is a bad faction.
I would say the Hellspurs, yes. I would say for the other elements of the plane, no, because I feel like even within even outside of Kellen being a good guy surrounded by bad guys, I think if you go to that plane and you go take out Okko's gang, you've got the Sterling Company as being the positive, being the okay, trying to create some law and some organisation on this outback fucking plane that needs some kind of organisation. Even though historically that's never a good thing, and the conquestors are always bad people. But I feel like the Hellspurs were specifically written and coded to be bad guys.
Interesting.
You're a scorpion demon. You're not going to be a good guy.
Scorpion dragon.
Scorpion dragon. Oh yeah, it's not a demon, is
No.
he? Scorpion dragon.
Now, okay.
It feels like a demon.
Well, I don't want to hold on Outlaws too long. I suppose if I was to backtrack and rewrite my premise, could you make a dual deck out of them where it's one faction versus another?
Yeah.
And I don't know if you could do Hellspurs versus...
You could do Hellspurs versus Sterling probably enough.
Actually.
But you then would have to keep the gang out because they cover all of the different bases. And that's not talking about, the Cactus Folks or the Atlan or any of that kind of thing.
Alright, we're not even... Okay, that was like fucking 5. Let's keep going. Markov Manor. Karlov Manor. Fuck.
It's hard because
there is no.
The bad person was someone who is the Selesnyan Dryad, who's connected to the world soul of the plane that was betrayed by the Phyrexian invasion.
I would argue, despite the fact that it's Ravnica, there were no factions.
There were no factions. No, there were individuals, and even then there were people that were murdered. Fine, I get it. But even then, you can justify Trostani's, and even within that, Trostani's a trio, and only one of the aspects was actually acting.
Yeah,
which is kind of insane. But yeah, no factions. Obviously, there is a good guy, but there isn't necessarily... I mean, there is a bad guy, but even then, they try to present it as being sympathetic, and I think they did a good job of it.
Lost Caverns of Ixalan. Now, I would say this is one of the exceptions where there is definitely a bad faction.
So yeah, so there were elements of the Conquistador vampires. Funny that we were talking about conquesting only like 2 sets ago. There are aspects of them that are fine. Elenda, benevolent enough. Obviously, it's hard when you're trying. Like, it's hard to devil's advocate a little bit sometimes when I get as a pioneering civilization wanting to go and explore other parts of the world. Of course, you go there with a sense of righteousness because you are exploring into that world, and it's very hard for you then to go, oh, there are people already here, never mind, leave you to it. It's always like, yeah, but can we at least see what you got? But you should go there with this element of, hey, look what we've got to provide for you. But then that's how religion also then...
I am watching a man in real time in the Year of Our Lord 2025 try and transport his modern sensibilities to ancient conquestors.
Yeah, but also in the frame of a fantasy setting with vampires and dinosaurs.
I'm going to tell you now, Nathan. There was no good to come.
No, I know, and I don't think that. So that's where obviously there's a clear-cut bad person, right? Because they are creating an analog.
I think so, and I do think narratively, as much as Vito was the guy who's like he's spearheading the sect of that faction to be the thing, the group of that faction, at least for Caverns that we followed, was those mono black vampires,
and they were bad. Yeah,
I agree.
Bad. And I guess
Aklazots was their thing.
Yes, yeah, literally, mono black again. Demon. This one's not a dragon. Actual demon. Hard to justify that actual demons aren't bad guys. And then obviously you still had the Rum Tum Tum pirates, which are always just kind of along for the ride.
Pirates are fun.
And then obviously the actual hereditary settlement people with their lovely feathered dinosaurs, which are quite clearly, the good guys, as it were. I guess. Because even when they got to the center and they got to the middle, and it was like, "Hey, we're ancient ancestors of each other." That's the good people. That was a very clear Indiana Jones aspect of.
There is a bad faction who are all trying to gain power for their own ends
on religious aspects as well.
And there's a good faction that's trying to protect their land.
Yeah, it was a very clear. Real world analog, and I don't think it's easy to pull away from that.
Yeah, because you imagine if they tried to put in too much nuance, people would be like, "Oh no, they raped and killed everyone."
Look, I think Bartolome and Alenda, that's as much as you can go. If you've got individual characters who
interesting,
who aren't
though,
backing it.
And
also Amelia.
Well, yeah, sure.
Kellen's girlfriend.
But that is actually a really good point. That you could maybe argue that completely nullifies the vampires as being out and out evil. I still think they definitely presented them as being the evil faction, and they had dissenters in the ranks, which I guess still proves my point that there are no more bad guys, because even in the explicit bad guy faction, they had to have an element of, but you can still play at them.
Yes, but the thing about that is that the faction was so bad that there are elements of their own faction who turned against them because they were so immoral and bad.
Yeah.
If anything, that's more damning because you've got people within your own faction that go, wait. It's that moment in a Peep Show. Wait, are we the bad guys?
That Mitchell and Webb look.
Yes, that Mitchell and Webb look. Yes, sorry, exactly. Where they, the Nazis standing there with the skull and crossbones, and they go, "Wait,
we're the baddies.
We're the baddies." And it's like, yeah, cool. And the fact that you have that perspective shows how bad your faction is. That you're able to have the perspective to realise what you're doing is overtly wrong.
All right, I agree. Wilds of Eldraine. Now, the witches were the bad guys,
and even then, there was a little bit of discourse at the end. Well, the big thing there was two different young regents trying to deal with their own pressure.
Yeah.
And obviously then Rowan also wanting to find out their mother, their true mother, and then Ariette ended up being bad, but not... At the end of the day, the worst thing they did was put a lot of people to sleep. Compare that to a few of the other stories, that's not actually so bad.
Yeah, I think it was definitely a case of we have this villain arc where it's not... You're not playing as... If I was to sit down and play a game of Magic, the Wilds, I think in OG Eldraine, they had a hint of the Wilds being this kind of chaotic, slightly cutthroat, survival of the fittest type realm.
Yeah, these fairies will come and take your eyes out,
yeah,
but only because they think it's fun.
Versus the realms, which, although they had a black faction and a red faction that were kind of like boisterous and a bit violent, they were still like noble questing.
It was all, like well-to-do courts that all interact with each other on a civil basis.
Yeah, whereas this more multicoloured, they kind of did away with the monocolours in Wilds of Eldraine. Yeah.
And even then, the bad guy turned out to be Jace at the end, who, before we knew it, is also considered to be the poster villain. Poster villain, sure, whatever. But even then, like, we found out that the main big bad guy wasn't even a main big bad guy and had his own agenda. So that kind of makes that whole set was just us in this realm. And there were, the occasional witch that was, like, doing bad things like eating children. I was like, yeah, cool, but it's all fun and whimsy. There's not, like, overt evil and overt good beyond Kellen being this sweet, delightful little soppy guy.
Also, I kind of feel like the kind of fairy tale elements of Eldraine, as we know it narratively, it's almost like that's just their nature.
Yeah, they're cautionary tales. It's not good versus evil. It's like an Aesop fable. The rabbit isn't an evil person because he's going fast, and the tortoise isn't a good guy because he went slow and won. It's a story, and it's supposed to educate you about what you're supposed to do in life.
Yeah.
And that's what fairy tales are as well. And as much as it's supposed to be like grim, and the grim fairy tales are quite dark, and they twist a little bit, there isn't, I don't think, overt evil in this set.
Okay, I've combined these three together. So, All-Be-One, March of the Machine, and Aftermath. Now, this might surprise you. I don't think the Phyrexians count in this set as an overtly evil faction.
It's hard, right? Because a lot of them are just doing what they do based on, like, colour directive. They're all savage. Don't get me wrong, there's a lack of humanity to this. And there is a kind of aspect of, like, are the Borg evil? From Star Trek? And I think Elish Norn as an individual, yes, absolutely.
So does she falls into the category then, because there's another one coming up that I think this is, which is the central big bad, but the faction doesn't necessarily go along with their plan.
Yeah, the fact there is quite literally, they split them into the 5 different factions, and that the red one is considered to be the only sympathetic colour, in terms of Arabraska is the only one who went, I'm not going to cut them up and force them to be super aggressive like Jin-Taxius or Vorinclex might have, and I'm not going to be fighting amongst 7 other fucking Thanes to see who has the most control and all that ambition bullshit from the Sheldred faction. And obviously it was the only one who went, hey, look, the Mirrans are here, let them be. And from the Mirrans are the good guys and the Phyrexians are the bad guys point of view, that's the only aspect of the Phyrexians that you can kind of be like, hey, you know what, not so bad.
Do you know what then? Because there's another set coming up that I think actually suits my point better.
Are we going to get all the way to New Phyrexia?
No.
Good. That's a lot longer ago.
Because you mentioning the Mirrans actually puts me in mind of... I know we said Kellen being the good guy versus all the bad guys doesn't necessarily mean that that's a good and bad faction. But the fact that you do have the Mirrans being the good faction maybe does pivot the Phyrexians. My argument against the Phyrexians being the bad faction is because their Phyrexians are not necessarily in it for themselves out of a sort of it's not a moral thing for them, it's an orthodoxy,
it's functional,
that's programmed into them.
But then you could say that how is that any less bad than the conquistador vampires following their own twisted religious perspective?
Okay, all right, well,
I think it's very hard to argue, especially in Magic, that the Phyrexians aren't the bad guys.
I take your point. All right, so we'll say there are bad guys in those ones, and it's definitely the Phyrexians.
Well, yeah.
Brothers' War. they both bad. Mishra,
Yeah,
Urza,
yeah, humans be bad. This is the funny thing, right? If Tarkir,
humans be bad.
because if Tarkir is a perfect example of, yes, there will always be conflict, and it's not the end of the world. That's just how it works. We completely missed the land cycle that I was supposed to bridge in between. But the land cycle, to touch on it now, had 5 allied, which showed the times of where the clans were harmonious with each other, and then the 5 enemy Gainlands. There were obviously all 10 Gainlands in the set. Showed them having minor conflicts, but also presenting it as sympathetic, going, they would only have troubles over this when it was only when they strayed too far, but they would never desecrate their temples, to show that both sides are just defending their own, not attacking their own. So in a similar kind of vein, to come back around to Brothers War, is that humans are bad, and both Mishra and Urza are bad people. You know, they're misguided in their own ways, they get caught up in their own story arcs, and yes, you could say at certain aspects, in certain points in that journey, they're fine. Yeah. But in the grand scheme of things, they led an entire plane to desolate war.
Yeah. You could, I mean, obviously there's the Phyrexian flavour in there with Mishra at this point in the story.
Gix has obviously got his hand
involved.
But
but the focus very much is factionally Mishra versus Urza.
Yes, but I think Urza has been always known to never... You would never look at Urza and be like, that guy, great man. And they put a pretty good job of this, and maybe this is the point, is that Old Magic did this really good job of going, you're following this guy as the protagonist, but my god, he's a fucker. Yeah. Whereas nowadays, you wouldn't necessarily do that as much.
I think they still, even in Brothers War, where this kind of, what I would say is this new narrative push to have a more sort of blended ideology put into the factions, they still present Mishra as the antagonist versus Urza's protagonist. Because it's almost like Urza is trying to be pro-Dominaria, whereas Mishra is trying to be like anti-Dominaria. Yeah. But like, when you read the stories and the Brothers War stories,
it's actually almost the flip of where you're more sympathetic towards Mishra, who's been outcasted, never got the privilege of being the Prince of Krug. Whereas Urza has this kind of like, oh well, I'm the older brother and I've got all of this kind of thing, and like both of them have their faults for sure,
and the lengths that both of them go to try and prove.
But Urza's almost going to these lengths without the influence of Phyrexia. Yeah, Mishra, you can't really you can't blame sometimes when his dreams are being haunted by a Phyrexian demon. Yeah. Whereas Urza's just there going, yeah, if he's going to do that, I'll do that too. You know, I'm willing to go to those lengths. I'm willing to... And don't get me wrong, there was obviously the moment of where they could have reconciled. And I'm pretty sure it was Mishra who said the petty thing. But it took Urza to react to that. Yeah. And it always takes 2 to tango in these things. And at that point, they're both complicit in the action of the war. And it's unfortunate that Mishra is the person you kind of go, well, that's a shame for more. Whereas with Urza, you go, you bloody bastard, you should have done better.
Okay, so no good guys in Brothers War.
No good guys.
Dominaria United. This is the one where I think factionally Phyrexians maybe couldn't be considered the bad faction.
Well, when you have the Phyrexian Dreadnought with Sholdred at the front, and then your main antagonist, I think by the end of it is, holy shit, Ajani's a sleeper agent.
Well, this is it. So I think this is where we fall into. This was your argument with the Cult of Valgavoth. Yeah. Where can you blame the Phyrexians in Dominaria United specifically because they, at this point in the story, are still in sleeper agent mode? So it's almost like the antagonists are the people who don't know they're Phyrexianized.
So we kind of breezed straight past the good guys from March of Machines and Aftermath and all of that, right? We didn't even touch on the fact of who was fighting back against the Phyrexians and whether or not...
we said the Mirrans were the good guys.
Yes, but none of the Planeswalkers are Mirrans. No. So look at, say, Luca, for example, going there with the best intentions and then becoming, look at Vraska, look at Nissa, look at Ajani. We never even spoke about Ajani being a good guy in Tarkir Dragonstorm because he is overtly a good guy in that, but Ajani is always a good guy in that. But then he hasn't always been, and I would agree that it's the Phyrexian aspect of the things that are influencing him that are evil and pushing him to do evil, bad things. So at their core, Phyrexia is bad, even if it's just a xenophobia of going, hey, if you're not with us, you're against us. It's like, yeah, that's a pretty harsh thing to state when your thing isn't overtly a good thing. There aren't aspects of Phyrexia you look at and go, you were able to turn this dying plane into a flourishing fucking environment that had amazing industry and stuff like that. We never see Phyrexia improving life. We just see Phyrexia taking life and twisting it into its metal form. So I don't think there's a way for you to justify that maybe, Phyrexia is justified in trying to do what it's doing.
Maybe I don't think it's justified. Maybe I just think, narratively, I don't know. I just don't. I think it's too. It was just too subtle in that set. But I'm willing to say that the Phyrexians were painted as the bad faction. Could you build? I can't even remember what the limited format in Dominaria United was.
Sleeper agents, right? So you didn't really get a lot of them, and if they were kind of spread across all of the colours. I'd argue at this point Shieldred is because she was the point of the Phyrexian of that invasion in Dominaria United. She is clearly the bad guy.
Yeah,
and then it's really hard because how far along are any of these sleeper agents in there from being a good guy to being a bad guy, which is where I think that whole set kind of lay. You know, even in some of the artworks for Ajani, you're like, he doesn't even look Phyrexian. And that's the thing that fucked it up. That's the thing that made Phyrexia so dangerous. Not necessarily evil or bad, but so dangerous is that it twisted people from being on one side with one mentality to another side with a different mentality.
Okay, well, I'm willing to say that Dominaria United then had a bad faction.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
I don't agree, but I'm willing to say it. I'm willing to say it. Streets of New Capena. Now, again, this has the Outlaws of Thunder Junction thing of it was a set of bad guys.
Yeah, it's bad guys on bad guys. Mafia versus demon mafia.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, obviously it's really hard. Any story that has Elspeth involved, you just look at her and go, cool, whoever you're fighting against is clearly a bad guy.
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because, so obviously Obnixilis was the big bad. And
another demon, what a surprise.
And in story, all of the mobsters that went to his side. But he wasn't one of the 5 factions in the game.
Were any of the 5 factions presented as unsavoury?
Now, I would say yes. I would say that the I can't remember all their names, but the Grixis-coloured vampires.
Maestros?
The Maestros, thank you. I think they were presented as the kind of cocky ones because they were almost all vampires. And their whole thing was that you had to be a vampire.
I guess
them.
even Anello, or however you pronounce it.
Anello, yeah.
He's like, hey, I'm just a painter guy. I'm like, you've just slit someone's fucking throat across a wall.
But again, I think because in the setting, especially when you look at the story, it is, oh my god, Xander, who is the one that takes Elspeth under his wing and teaches her.
Under his wing.
Well, yeah.
Nudge, nudge.
And although you have some factions like the Cabaretti are seen as being like, hey, we're the party guys.
Yeah.
They are still all explicitly villainous mob families.
I guess it's hard. Like Bugsy Malone, like it's just 2 different bad groups, right? It's just you're seeing it from the perspective of one, and if you saw it from the perspective of the other, things would be different.
If any of those kids in Bugsy Malone had a dairy intolerance, then they'd be fucked.
Yes, good thing people weren't lactose intolerant back then, way. But it's kind of like you even say like Xander had like artwork or something. There's nothing to say that someone who appreciates art can't be a bad guy, but it's definitely a much more sympathetically portrayed bad guy. Even as the 7 mana come in, sack half your shit. When it dies, sack your shit. And when I attack, sack half your shit. That's all very villainousy, very Nicobolus, mustache twirling, Grixis-y kind of things. And he wasn't even that bad.
No.
In fact, if anything, I'd say that there's the indifference of people like Spara. Is it Spara?
Sparta.
Sparta? I thought that was Devil May Cry.
Yeah,
they just all use the same words.
There's so many words.
Good, yeah. But they are essentially 5 demon-led mafia families, and the problem is, and we said it at the time, they didn't present enough of a police faction, and the angels were non-existent.
Yeah.
So we don't really get a good scope of there being a bad guy or a bad faction because they are all, and because we're within that story, it's impossible to kind of separate that out.
So I mean, as much as Obnixilis was a big bad, I would say you couldn't play as the bad guys because they were no good guys.
And even then, Obnixilis being a bad guy killing another bad guy, isn't that one less bad guy? So he's now a good guy.
Where's Batman when you need him?
Precisely.
So
I don't think compared. I think it's hard to have a mafia set unless you and they did the thing of avoiding the police because normally the police at that time of life and still kind of nowish, they're the bad guys perceptively by
yeah, I suppose depending what bent you have.
And that's why that happens. So it's hard. I'm going to put my hands up and go, no bad guys, because all bad guys.
Good guys.
Oh, no good guys. Yeah, no bad faction.
Kamigawa, Neon, Genesis, Evangelion.
So we're now at a point of where we're going to now be backtracking through most sets having some kind of Phyrexia. Because that's no longer over.
But faction, again, I keep using this fucking word. The Reckoners were seen as being like the kind of street tough biker gang.
But fine, just because you're black affiliated doesn't mean you're a bad guy. Magic's been moving away from that.
The Imperial Forces were seen as being a bit hoity-toity.
But that's always the way.
As well.
No one ever likes the government or the soldiers, but in reality, government and soldiers are supposed to be good people.
The kind of the red samurai faction were seen as being a bit aggressive, but they weren't necessarily bad guys.
No,
Again,
the snakes literally gained and lost limbs.
Yeah, I think this is another case of this is a setting where they definitely went. It's just the hustle and bustle of different ways of life, right?
I think that Jin-Jataxius, sorry to miss one of the Juz, actively trying to pick apart camis and understand their biology is obviously crazy scientist bad guy, but you've never really been too angry at Igor down in his dungeon. So I think at that point, there is no good or bad, even if by the end of it, Tamio gets completed. Yeah. I think,
And then we have... So I'm going to say no good guys, no bad guys.
No, I don't look at Neon Dynasty and go, there are two factions.
Yeah.
I just look at it as we go back into Kamigawa, some are good, some are bad. The story will tell you which. Cool, fine, whatever.
Innistrad, Midnight Hunt, and Crimson Vow.
Oh, it's hard, isn't it?
Well, see, is it? Because actually...
Are all vampires dicks?
In the way that they presented it...
Are all werewolves dicks?
In Midnight Hunt, the werewolves were definitely the antagonist.
A human's always okay
against the witches, right?
But then it's always. But again, I would always. Yes, the narrative says that we, the squishy, non-superpowered human, of course, we're facing all the horrors of the night, and obviously all of the horrors of the night are bad. So in terms of factions, yes, but then that means there's only one faction on Innistrad that isn't bad, and that's the humans. And every other faction, be it the Geists, be it the imps and the devils, the demons, the werewolves.
But in OG Innistrad, the church was definitely presented as having villainous qualities.
So true. But then also Innistrad is a very interesting one, actually, because you've got the situation where Arlen Cord is a protagonist, and she's doing a fantastic job of being on the good side whilst fighting against Tovolar. But Tovolar is definitely being the antagonistic, animalistic force against them. And then when you get to Crimson Vow, we've kind of avoided, and we're kind of moving away from the humans being, oppressed by all the different various bad guys of the plane, and we're actually just at, hey, it's a vampire wedding, so the aristocracy are bad because people being rich and having money when they don't deserve it, or living extra long and then sitting on all of their wealth is kind of a bad thing. Both Edgar and Olivia are, for lack of better terms, bad people. And kind of the focus then for Midnight Vow is more, hey, can we party crash, rather than having this good faction versus bad faction that Midnight Hunt had.
But the thing is, though, I would say with the vampires, specifically, the fact that they focused on vampires versus the humans trying to infiltrate the party, is that the vampires are actually hyper-aware of the fact that they are, the dominant species, and that's how they perceive themselves. So much like the vampires... sorry, vampire lovers, I'm not trying to, cast aspersions on your entire, typal sort of species. But, they know that they're, the evil ones, right?
Yeah, I guess... Are they aware enough to know that if they keep doing what they're doing, eventually the plane will collapse? Because then at that point, that's not overt evil. That's just accidental evil through opulence, right?
Yeah, but I would suppose... But then do the fucking billionaires on our planet understand? No, they can't see 2 feet in front of their face.
They don't care.
Well, the vampires don't care.
But it's not... do you think Elon Musk actively knows that he's ruining people's lives, or he's just so...
I shouldn't have brought politics into
I know, but is it because he's so stuck in his own life, he's not being... From our intents purposes, he's doing evil things. When he went out on stage... Yeah, actually, that's a lie. He went out on stage with a giant fucking chainsaw.
He did do that, yes.
He knows what he's doing, and I think that to a degree... We can't obviously translate that into that particular set, but I think at that particular point, all of the vampires are trying to do is just having a party and having a marriage. I think Olivia is probably a bad person, and she is a bad person.
But I think... I actually... in my notes, put werewolves and vampires as being the soft antagonists, which wouldn't necessarily fall into what I think is being an evil faction, and Olivia being the big bad.
And it's because the next time we see her, she's just in a flouncy dress on Outlaws of Further Junction
again.
Well,
same with all of them. But
that's true. Every single bad person was there.
But the more I think about it, the more I think if we had more time, which we don't necessarily, I would maybe look at older sets and be like, how have things changed in each one of these? How has it been more binary?
How is Olivia versus Baron Sengir, for example?
Exactly. Yeah. Or Zendikar is a good example in the World Wake / Battle of the Zendikar era of being definitely it's Zendikarians versus Eldrazi.
Yep.
Eldrazi, as much as they're a force of nature, are the bad faction because, do you know what I mean? So, like, even though a lot of these nuances that we're talking about forces of nature are still applying older sets, the way that they were structured and the kind of, I'm playing the Eldrazi side, and I'm playing... Whereas, I think, actually, Midnight Hunt and Crimson Vow is definitely a set which you can be like, I'm playing as the vampires, and the vampires are the baddies. And I'm playing as the humans, and the humans are the goodies, because they're just trying... And same with the werewolves.
And I think that's unfortunately just a narrative trap, because, again, it's we are the squishy humans versus all of the bad monsters of the night, because in that circumstance, you even have Sorin, who, for the most part, is, like, a pretty annoying bad... He's not a bad guy, but you don't sympathise with him a lot, and you tend to sit there, apart from being like, oh, I like the blonde-haired vampire guy... Like, but him being on the side of the good guys almost showed like, whoa, shit has got bad, we've got this guy on our side. Versus Arlen, who is overtly a good person, fighting against the bad werewolves.
Yes.
Even though both of their circumstances were accidental and they weren't decisions.
But if we compare that to what we said about Lost Cans of Ixalan, where we knew that the vampire faction there was the baddie and Elenda was maybe a goodie within them.
It doesn't change the faction.
Doesn't change the faction.
And let's be honest, the werewolves were... I think that's the thing, the werewolves are probably worse than the vampires because the werewolves were actively trying to maintain the wonky time scale, the wonky moon cycle, and actively kill all of the humans. Whereas the vampires are just off in their castle having a party.
I would say it's an interesting one because just mentioning the fact that I mentioned old Zendikar, older Innistrad sets, both Shadows Over and original Innistrad, even though they had horrors versus humans, and they even did like in both those ones, they even did dual decks about it. I would make a case, actually, especially in Shadows Over Innistrad, that it was very much plane versus Eldrazi threat.
It was it was plane versus extra planar threat. Yeah. It's actually it was plane versus Nahiri being a massive cunt.
Sure, but but through the Eldrazi, right?
Yes.
And then OG Innistrad, you could maybe argue, yes, the vampires, the zombies, the werewolves, but also the Church of Avacyn. So even the good guys...
Because they massively dialed back on that, right? Because obviously you had the Angels all turncoat with the influence of the Eldrazi, which kind of, I think, was then the point to go, we can no longer say that Church is bad oppressive because it's kind of indoctrinating people. And we also can't say, hey, Church is good because all of the fucking Angels went mental. It's now humans trying to survive.
Yeah. The idea of faith is not a bad thing. The organisation that was the dominant religion with the humans has turned. Yeah. Which is so on the... It was a very on the nose, like, look at the church in human world, where it's like, maybe the church isn't always a great thing. I say this as a raised Catholic, do you know what I mean?
And we still have like sibling rivalries, which are fun and cool, but it's two different necromancers raising dead in different ways. So it's like, Innistrad's a funky one because it's very difficult not to say that, hey, if you're just like a normal human, you're probably a good guy and everything else is terrible. Yeah. But that doesn't create factions per se that are evil.
Yeah. I think, again, they just are what they are.
Yeah. Because even in the OG Innistrad, Gristlebrand was just like, hi, I'm out of my... Oh, God, you killed me immediately.
So what are we saying, much like, say, Outlaws or Wilds of Eldraine, there are no...
overt
There's no
evil
villains.
Yeah, there's no overt apart. I think the werewolves stray very close to it. I think Midnight Hunt, you could say, yes, the werewolves are the overt bad guys. If you're making a film of this, it's a very scary film and those are the bad guys. Every time you cut to Toverlai, he's being a cunt and being a bit of a dickhead. Yeah. Whereas in the film of Crimson Vow, it is actually probably from the point of view of the good guys going and crashing a party that they probably otherwise didn't need to.
Well, isn't that just the film From Dusk Till Dawn? And the vampires are the bad guys in that one.
True. I mean, again, the vampires are always the bad guys. It's just whether they're presented as being in the evil faction or not.
That's fucking such a sick film. Mm-hmm. Okay, that was the last 16 sets.
Okay, that's not as... Fuck, are you kidding me? Innistrad was only 16 sets ago.
Well,
sorry. Innistrad, yeah, because I thought it would have been
Innistrad
way
is 2
more.
sets, and then you have All Will Be One, March Machine.
It feels very close. It feels very close, but it also feels very far away. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. Because I'd have thought there'd have been more... I thought we'd have gone further back than that.
I remember the feeling when we saw the little pictograph of the timeline for when they showed the 2 different Innistrad sets, that they were like, these are 2 standalone sets. Yeah. And we were like, what?
Yeah, I guess it's always 4 sets per year, so if we're even going back 4 years, that should be 16 sets by then anyway.
So, out of the 16 sets, if I say 1, 2, 3, 4 of them are soft... Okay, there's maybe some evil factions, but maybe it's not quite as clear-cut as all that. They're still very nuanced.
Yeah.
And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sets where it's like these guys are really fucking evil, that's an evil faction. 3 of those being all be one, March Machines,
the Phyrexian arc, yeah. Which again they tried to present this idea of it wasn't
and Dominaria United,
and it was all just one focus.
Out of those 5 sets that we're saying, this is definitely a factional set with an evil faction.
Well, this is why I think Dominaria United sits on the other side, because it wasn't all 5 being it wasn't all 5 factions together. It was literally just Sheldron's faction invading Dominaria, which is what goes back to. I think they deliberately did this. It feels way more old school Phyrexian invasion.
So let's get rid of the soft ones, because that still fits into the thesis of the narrative and game design team still don't want you necessarily to have like you playing as the baddies for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Out of 16 sets, only 5 of them, in our estimation, which is only our opinion, have bad guys in them.
Yeah, I'm thinking now outside of Magic IP, because the other 2 big bads, which goes way further back than 16 sets, are obviously Eldrazi, which we've already spoken about, Force of Nature, but being killed off by another invading species is overtly bad, and then obviously Nicol Bolas, which, yeah, fair enough, you've got Archenemy being a thing that happened around Amonkhet with being like, hey, now you can play as the bad guy, which they specifically tried to focus on, making the bad guy deck super powerful and all of the other 3 decks have to face against it. And you get to plot things. That's really cool. They haven't done that in a while, and it's quite obvious they haven't done it in a while. We've retouched back on Plane Chase. We haven't retouched back on Archenemy, which clearly shows that they like this. Players like the chaos, no one knows what's going on kind of style of gameplay, whereas the, hey, I want everyone against me style of gameplay kind of goes against the social contract of Magic, of where 1v1 we're both equal because we're both trying to win. In a 4-player game, hey, it's kind of a political free-for-all kind of nonsense, and if one person is going too far, they get politicked down.
I suppose, yeah, I kind of went into this idea thinking I was going to be like, I feel like game design and narrative design combined is sort of wussing out of this idea of like, hey, you get to be good and bad because everyone has to be sort of on the same playing field. But really, I actually think that's a very reductive way of thinking, and I do sort of feel like on the grand scheme of things, if you're building nuanced worlds with depth and play styles that can be modular and, feel coherent in a limited environment whilst also feeling coherent in a commander environment, whatever, building in very real-world nuances, which Dragonstorm shows in buckets, is actually probably the best way to go.
I agree. Because even then, like, I'm trying to think of, like, Universes Beyond, like even putting all of the bad people from Doctor Who into one set, even then when you're looking through that, you're like, I mean, a fair few of these are somewhat sympathetic. It just happened to be they were the bad person of that particular episode.
Yeah.
Even if that it's just I'm trying to survive, you're trying to survive, but the story from your point of view, which makes me the bad thing. Like, look at The Thing. I accidentally crash landed. We say accident. I don't know if it was accident or not. I've accidentally crash landed in this horrible hellscape of a planet because it's cold and dark, and there's all these people out there that
full of Norwegian people,
loud and obnoxious and all aggressive towards each other. And like, imagine being an alien that has an ability to transform into anyone. You look around, you go, these are my options.
Yeah.
Like humanity, and we've said that historically, it's been pretty obvious. Humanity isn't great. Humanity isn't a protagonist. In our world, humanity is a little bit fucking shit because we are the only thing, right? It's just different types of human. So we know the full extent of evil is human. The full extent of good is human. We're going into a fantasy element of where we need to try and translate that spectrum into things outside of human, and human just naturally goes, well, we're just going to put human on the far left of things unless we want to really subvert things, with, say, like, the Church of Avacyn and stuff on Innistrad. So I think fantasy struggles when it doesn't have a good thing versus a bad thing. I just think the amount of narrative weight they're placing on things in this current middle ground where we don't have an overarching bad guy it's impossible to go, oh, it's bad and it's poor form, to go, hey, this is the bad thing and this is the good thing and you've got to choose a side. Because 5 colours doesn't stretch across 2 very, very easily. So it's almost as if within every faction of colour, there should be good and bad.
I suppose the genesis of my grumpiness with it came from, if you look at Ravnica, which I know all roads lead back to Ravnica a little bit, and you look at all the 10 factions, and they do a really good job, and they have done in every set which Ravnica is a key part of. They've done a really good job at showing every guild has a good side and a bad side, or it has a use and a disruption.
Yeah.
They're all vying for power, and that means they all have their own selfishness at heart, but they all have a kind of, they're all a cogging machine. However, you could definitely go the Golgari to a certain extent, definitely the Orzhov, and the Rakdos to a certain extent.
All black factions.
Well, the black factions that were... The Orzhov are especially like, no, they're the evil mafia church.
They care about money. And
as
money
I am an
keep
Orzhov
carrying people
player,
bastards.
And there was almost like an enjoyment of being like, I'm going to be the when I play this faction, I'm going to be draining your life.
Every time I tap a black, I'm going to extort you.
Yeah,
Give me your life.
I'm going to be creating tokens when you kill my stuff, so you can't kill me, and I'm going to keep grinding.
Yeah, that having fun with being the bad guy element is maybe they've done it so well that you no longer feel like the bad guy.
I think that's what I'm missing. Like, they do whole sets. They've done now, as we've ran in the past 16 sets, at least 2, if not more of them, where this set's all about everyone being a bad guy. And if everyone's a bad guy...
No one is.
Yeah.
So this leads now nice and succinctly onto probably the final point we'll talk about. Because we've already mentioned Phyrexia, we've already mentioned the Eldrazi. The 3 big bads of Magic are those 2 plus Nicol Bolas, who in the last set has been confirmed to have been released.
Yeah.
And if there's any character in all of Magic you can't sit and go, well, maybe his intentions are good. It's Nicol fucking Bolas.
Yeah.
And I know people out there who have Nicol Bolas decks of where they want to do horrible, nasty things in a game. And I'm like, that's cool. I'm a steal your girl kind of player. I really want to steal your shit because I find that fun and it pisses you off, which makes me even like it even more. And we didn't mention...
You're super fun to play against,
I know. Yeah, but you say that. I'm not fun to play against, but I'm fun to play with.
Yeah.
And the other thing with the Ravnica thing is Dimir were the active antagonistic not clan, fuck guild in the original Ravnica
with
block.
Zadek, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that was him being a bad apple from the tree, right? And that's another thing we haven't really spoken about too much, or in exact detail, is that a lot of these groups and factions are only as bad as their worst player, and sometimes their worst player is so bad, everything else kind of falls behind them.
Well, that's the veto effect, right?
Yes.
And the Olivia effect.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there is something to be said that going forwards, there might be... And who was the second in command to Nicol Bolas for a lot of his machinations?
Tezzeret.
And what's the next set going to be focusing on that's actually Magic related?
Tezzeret
out in space. Yeah, so there might be more of a focus of that going forwards, and also it's easier in other IPs. So Final Fantasy, Sephiroth a bad guy, Cloud Strife a good guy. In Marvel, Spider-Man a good guy, Green Goblin a bad guy, and this is without any of the nuance and the sympathies and the every good guy has bad things, every bad guy has good elements.
Spoilers for Final Fantasy VII. Cloud stole someone else's identity, but whatever.
Yeah, without meaning to. It wasn't his fault. It was genetic experimentation. And then obviously with Marvel, you've got things like you can sympathise with a lot of the villains, but there is very much a villain of the week. Is the bad guy you're supposed to be rooting against, and there's definitely going to be even in the vernacular of the creature typing, hero. It's now becoming a thing. So if hero is a thing, and we've got villainous choice as a mechanic, how long before we just have creature type bad guy? And then it becomes a little less nuanced, and it becomes a little bit more obvious. They go, this person, Iron Man, my Iron Man deck is a deck based around a human hero. And I don't know how I feel about that, because I, don't think that Iron Man is specifically and only a good guy. There are aspects of his character that...
Every single Marvel hero has a comic book written about them if they were villains.
If you don't have nuance, your character is bullshit. I'm sorry. There is no offense to you. It's really hard to pull off a One Punch Man situation of where you do one thing every fucking episode and it works. That's just not how prolonged story works. And Magic is a prolonged 30-year story. And so every time we're touching back in the actual IP instead of other mediums that can maybe better reflect that or push it more than Magic is willing to, that'll be the points that are quite interesting. And Tezzeret being hopefully now past his villain arc, but maybe still in it, we don't know, we'll get there. And then Nicol Bolas, we don't know how long it's going to be until we next see him. And even things like we've got Lorwyn on the horizon, which you'd expect to be similar to like Bloomburrow in being just a nicey.
I mean, I did write notes for Lorwyn Shadowmoor, but obviously the whole idea is that their dynamics get flipped.
Yeah, and even then, Ona was super, super bad, but she's also very mischievous from like Shakespeare times, which are super bad, grim fairy tale kind of bad, but not in the same way Eldrazi. Again, let's see how the next couple of years go. But with Nicol Bolas on the horizon and Tezzeret on our back door, that might be completely different. Come a year's time, we're like, oh, never mind, they brought it all back and they've been doing it for the last couple of sets. Yeah. So it's just interesting to see it from a modern enough human set where you have to present
both sides as being sympathetic because that is just how history works. It's written by our victors, but that doesn't mean that both sides weren't just trying to defend their own peace and their own home. And Dragonstorm Tarkir does a really good job of showing that take away a proper, obvious antagonist, you can present a good and bad and a neutral environment that's fun to engage with.
Yeah. Well said.
Thank you.
Let us know on our social media if we've just talked complete bullshit for the past hour and 20.
When do we not?
Well, I feel like this is absolutely, this, out of many of our episodes, is a Genesis idea of going, I've had this rather off-the-fucking-wall thought about magic and how it's written, and it might just be me in my own, like, cave going, blah, 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 and just kind of, coming out with this shit.
It was me, 3 different voice notes at 2 o'clock in the morning going, I think I've got something, Andy. I think we've got something.
Me on my way to work the next day going, yes, I also have an answer to your, proposal. So let us know if you agree. If you don't agree, what sets you think have factional antagonists? I don't care about your big bads. Everything's got a big bad. Give me cards on the deck that I could be the bad guy. Right?
What parts of the story did we forget about that makes you go, actually, did you forget that this was like, yeah, we did, actually.
Yeah.
It was 16 fucking sets. So sorry we didn't remember all of it.
Let us know on our Bluesky. Please follow us on Bluesky as well. It's always good to have new followers because we're content creators and that's what we crave day in, day out.
Interact with me, baby.
Dream about it. Fucking give it to us. You can also email us at mtflavouring@gmail.com. Anything else to say?
No, that was good. I like that. There's nothing nebulously that I want to talk about. So no, is my answer.
Awesome, you stretched that out.
I really did. I wanted to be inspired, but I wasted it all on the episode.
Thank you so much for listening. This has been Magic Flavouring.
We'll see you soon.